It's our concern as plaintiffs that right from the start, we were adamant that every cent has to go back to these kids. Like the amount that was taken, dollar for dollar.
Tonight, a historic victory after the Manitoba government agrees to settle a child welfare class action lawsuit worth more than $500 million.
This funding is about helping these organizations prevent
new funding to help prevent gender-based violence.
I'm feeling really proud about it, like kind of bringing back my culture and all that. At such a young age is really impressive for me.
And a young First Nations entrepreneur is out to make a name for himself. Hello and welcome to APTN National News on this beautiful Monday evening. I'm Sav Jonesa. A $530 million settlement is being hailed as a historic victory for some of the most vulnerable people in Manitoba. An agreement in principle was made public today in the long-running class action lawsuit. It will see the province pay children in the child welfare system over the misappropriation of their children's special allowances, or CSAs, over a 14-year period. At any given time, roughly 10,000 kids are in care in Manitoba. 90% of them are Indigenous. Two of the plaintiffs in the case, both former executives at child welfare agencies, called the holdback of the CSAs theft and said it was a practice that discriminated against the most vulnerable children in the province.
When you can compare this situation to, say, if your child's not in care, and you're in receipt of the child tax credit, the benefit, and then the government turns around, the provincial government, and takes that amount off your paycheck. You know, I think that parents in Manitoba who receive this child tax benefit would be outraged.
It's our concern as plaintiffs that right from the start, we were adamant that every cent has to go back to these kids. Like the amount that was taken, dollar for dollar, any interest that accrued over that time period for that money, the value of that money today, as well as charter damages, that goes directly to the kids. And that's how we hope and will be adamant that in the distribution plan that is what happens.
The agreement still needs to be approved by the court and will then be subject to a 30-day appeal period. A distribution plan also needs to be worked out for what is believed to be roughly 30,000 people who were in care between 2004 and 2019. Under some of the formulas mentioned by the lawyers, some of the people harmed by the practice could receive tens of thousands of dollars in compensation. The only Catholic church in Iqaluit wants to be exempt from paying property taxes, and they're set to explain their position to the City Council this week. After unmarked graves were found on the Kamloops residential school grounds in 2021, Iqaluit Mayor at the time, Kenny Bell, pushed for the taxation of churches. The next year, the city started using an application process where groups would have to show they provide an essential community service to get an exemption. At the time, the Our Lady of the Assumption Parish did not apply. Now they do. A delegation from the church say they do provide essential services to the community. Several organizations use the church, including the city itself, Elections Canada, and several Inuit organizations. The application will be presented to Iqaluit City Council Tuesday evening. Last week, the Canadian Auditor General, Karen Hogan, released a report to Parliament. The report says that the federal government is failing to improve housing conditions for First Nation communities. APTN's Chris Stewart spoke to Treaty 8 Grand Chief Arthur Noski on his reaction to the report.
Last week's report by the Auditor General did not hold back on criticizing the federal government on how it has funded housing on Indigenous communities across the country. Karen Hogan's report says that many First Nation members do not have access to safe housing. This is their fourth report on housing conditions in 20 years, and it says conditions have not changed in that time.
After 4 audit reports, I can honestly say that I am completely discouraged that so little has changed and that so many First Nations individuals and families continue to live in substandard homes.
For the prairies, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, the report says communities have been underfunded by $140 million since 2008 for housing because the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation is using population data from the 2001 census. Money needed to build and repair homes. APTN spoke to Arthur Noski, the Grand Chief of the Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta, at a recent Keepers of the Water conference. He is very concerned about the lack of funding increases.
I come from a membership that's about 700 population, and at the time where we kind of got into this process in the 1992, our housing funding was $137,000. So going on 30 years plus, it's still $137,000.
Indigenous people are the fastest growing population in Canada, increasing by 9.4% from 2016 to 2021, according to the 2021 census. Grand Chief Noski says the federal government hasn't taken higher populations into account.
Through a land claim process, they use numbers of 3.9 people per house to a max of 5.2, 5.3 per household. So if they take the populations now in First Nations country and do that calculations, I think that funding would adjust drastically.
He says the federal government continues to ignore treaty rights.
Housing is very crucial. It's very crucial to your health, you know, in your confidence, in your demeanor. But I know, like I said, they keep doing things that don't honor what the agreements are supposed to be.
The CMHC has now agreed to use the latest census data by the end of 2025 for funding. Both they and Indigenous Services Canada say they accept all of the report's recommendations. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
A First Nation in Northern Ontario is getting close to $3 million in help from Ottawa to help build a temporary nursing station. This is after the previous facility was destroyed by fire earlier this month. The Margaret Gray Nursing Station in Cat Lake First Nation burned to the ground on March 2nd. Indigenous Services says the $2.8 million will be used to purchase, transport, and set up modular buildings. In the meantime, Cat Lake has been using a healing center as the interim health care space. More than 80 people had been sent to Thunder Bay for specialized medical services since the fire. They have all since returned. Now to Vancouver, where the Danger Cats are once again making headlines as they continue with a comedy routine that reportedly includes making fun of murder victims and residential school survivors. But as APTN's Tina House reports, family members of the many victims showed up to rally against what they are calling hate speech.
This isn't a joke. Look at this. Look at this. This is hate. This is a crime. My auntie, she was a daughter, she was a mother, she was an auntie, a cousin.
Close to 100 people showed up to protest against the Danger Cats, a comedy group from Alberta that makes fun of the many victims of serial killer Robert Pickton. And shockingly, they decided to hold their show in the exact neighborhood where many of the women went missing from and were later murdered, including Lorelei Williams' own cousin, Tanya Holick. She was killed on the Pickton farm.
We cannot allow the genocidal violence against marginalized women and girls to become fodder for entertainment and or some sad attempt at humor. These views perpetuate dangerous stereotypes and discrimination. It was this very discrimination that allowed Pickton and his associates to prey upon these women for so long.
After awareness about what they were making jokes about increased, many venues they were set to perform in canceled their shows. Danger Cats were also selling t-shirts that read 50 flavors of hookery smoked bacon, but that merchandise was removed from their website due to a public outcry. Despite all the criticism of their comedy show, Danger Cats vowed to continue a small tour in secretive venues. Only ticket holders were notified the day of the show with an address of the location. And their secret location is here at a privately owned gym called F45. As ticket holders showed up, they were shamed by the crowd and things got heated.
Let the cameras see them! Shame on you! All of you! Let them! Let the cameras see their faces! And this, again, look, this is what the cops uphold. They uphold hate. They uphold racism. They uphold the ongoing genocide of Indigenous people.
Michelle Pinot's daughter, Stephanie Lane, was just 20 years old when she was killed by Picton. Pinot bought a ticket to the show because she wanted to know where the secret location was going to be to come here and rally against it. But when she tried to enter, police would not let her in.
Let her in. You only let white males and white women in? Is this an apartheid right now? Is the BPD doing an apartheid right now? Whites only?
For 27 years, I've been trying to lead a life of some kind of normal, which when degenerates like this bring it up is impossible. It's like putting the knife in and turning it, picking the scab over and over and over and over. It's inhumane. It's torture what these people are putting families through.
APTN News contacted the owner of the gym, and he claimed to know nothing about the event and apologized to anyone that was offended. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Downtown East Side.
An on-the-land healing camp in the Northwest Territories is celebrating milestones and is planning for the future. Our reporter, Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, brings you this sneak peek on what she's working on.
In the peace and quiet of the bush, healing happens. The Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation is celebrating 7 years in operation today. And since its opening, this camp has been helping Métis, Inuit, and Dene youth, elders, and families work through trauma, addictions, homelessness, and mental health. Located in the heart of Yellowknife, the Urban on the Land program has expanded significantly, filling in gaps using traditional practices.
It's really a nice feeling to watch our people just switch right in front of you, just by listening to their story.
That's coming up soon on APTN National News.
Welcome back. The federal government has announced new funding to help combat gender-based violence in the prairies. Sierra Beddens has the story.
Today, 17 organizations across Manitoba and Saskatchewan received federal funding to combat gender-based violence. At a press conference at the Forks, Marcy Ian, Minister for Women, Gender Equality and Youth, unveiled $7.4 million in funding for violence prevention and capacity building.
This funding is about helping these organizations prevent, because that's important, we don't want it to happen in the first place, and address gender-based violence and find long-lasting solutions for their communities.
Ian said the funding will go to Indigenous organizations. According to Statistics Canada, more than 6 in 10 Indigenous women have experienced physical or sexual assault in their lifetime. Shanley Scott, the executive director at Nadinaway, an organization that works with at-risk youth, says the funding will help them develop a kinship-based model to address the issue.
We often are kind of confined to a Western framework, and so we're going to utilize the funds to develop a framework that is more indicative of who we are as Indigenous peoples and supports the voices of the children we serve, children and youth we serve, as well as the voices of our elders and knowledge keepers.
Hilda Anderson-Pierce is the chair of the National Family and Survivor Circle. She says more must be done to connect Indigenous peoples living in rural and remote communities to these services. According to 2019 Statistics Canada data, women living in rural and remote communities experience intimate partner violence at rates nearly twice as high as those in urban areas.
We need to really be very nimble in providing these resources and building the capacity in remote, isolated areas, because women cannot and children cannot, and our two-spirit and gender diverse relatives cannot suffer in silence. We need to ensure that they have wraparound supports, that are rooted in Indigenous ways of being, knowing, and doing.
Anderson Pierce adds that governments must include the perspectives of Indigenous women and gender diverse people in policy decisions around gender-based violence. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The 2024 Juno Awards were held in Halifax on Sunday. Angel Moore has a wrap-up of all the Indigenous artists who went home with the hardware.
The 2024 Junos honored the achievements of Canadian music, and this year did not disappoint with Indigenous artists. A. Sanabi from the Sandy Lake First Nation in Northern Ontario won Songwriter of the Year and Alternative Album of the Year.
I grew up in a trailer in Northern Ontario without electricity and running water, and now I'm here.
Traditional Indigenous Artist or Group of the Year was awarded to Joel Wood. Wood has also performed with Northern Cree. Accompanied on stage with his wife, Wood thanked the youth.
And I want to give a shout out to all those little res boys, res girls back home who turn over their mom's laundry basket and they jam them powwow songs, them Sundance songs, and prayer songs.
Inuk singer and songwriter Ailey Seppi won Indigenous Artist or Group of the Year.
So this is to my uncle's Sugluk band. They formed a rock and roll band after their residential schools, and they pretty much formed me. They made me who I am.
Contemporary Roots Album of the Year went to William Prince of the Peguis First Nation. Prince played music with his father at gigs in northern Manitoba.
All the youth of the Peguis First Nation, it takes a real village to lift somebody like myself so high. So thank you so much for this honor, and stand in the joy, my friends.
The 2025 Junos will be held in Vancouver. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also called Halifax.
Thanks for that, Angel. We have to take one last break, but stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. From Babine Lake, this is Harvesting Island, thanks to John Nicholas, who tells us this location is also known as Sunset Island. Thanks, John. For the chance to be our next photo of the day, send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. It'll be +2 in St. John's, +5 in Charlottetown, -6 in Nain, and -11 in Kuujjuaq. It'll be +12 in Montreal and +4 in Quebec City, +11 in London, +8 in North Bay, +6 in Timmins and -9 in Big Trout Lake. It'll be sunny and -13 in Churchill, cloudy and -7 in Norway House, -7 and snow in Winnipeg, and -11 in Dauphin, -3 in Regina, -5 in North Battleford, -4 in Stony Rapids, and -1 in Meadow Lake, +1 in High Level, +12 in Grand Prairie, -2 in Medicine Hat, and +4 in Edmonton, +12 in Vancouver, and +11 in Bella Coola, +7 and some sun in Fort Nelson, +11 in Prince George, -3 in Old Crow, and +8 in Watson Lake, +1 in Yellowknife, and -1 in Norman Wells, -11 in Sachs Harbor, and -4 in Colville Lake, -15 in sun in Chesterfield, Around 2 years ago, we first brought you the story on Owl Boy, a young First Nations entrepreneur from the Yukon who was stitching a name for himself in the fashion world, one bead at a time. Now the Owl Boy has another feather in his hat, his very own clothing line. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
So it's just pretty simple clothing, but I put a lot of work into it.
After 2 years of hard work, Cohen Quash is celebrating the launch of his new Indigenous clothing line. It's an impressive feat considering he's 14 years old.
I'm feeling really proud about it, like kind of bringing back my culture and all that. At such a young age is really impressive for me.
Quash is Casca, Taltan, and Tlingit. His new line, Bestie Owls, is an ode to his signature pendant beadwork, much of which features owls.
These are the bags I made. Then I made like fanny packs.
The line will include ready-to-wear clothing, accessories, and of course, beading.
I just really thought what if I did modern day clothing, like stuff that people wear in a normal day.
The young designer has received much acclaim for his work. Last year, he was the youngest person to have his work acquired by Yukon government's permanent art collection.
He also created the 3 gorgeous pendants pictured behind me.
Quash's success is no surprise to mentor Duma Alward. The online boutique shop owner first began selling Quash's work when he was 12. The two have been besties ever since.
It's humbling for me. It's proud mama almost feeling, like I feel like the mother hen, and beaming with pride. So happy for him. He deserves this. He's a really great human being.
I want to thank everyone who supported me on my journey from 2021 to 2024. In 2022,
Mom Barbara Morris also couldn't be more proud.
I feel like his future holds Paris, New York, and all the places he wants to go, Toronto, Vancouver, and I'm excited to be along for the ride.
The young designer's plan now is to go to more fashion shows. He hopes to one day be the next big Indigenous designer. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
A brother and sister duo have made it a family affair by taking the honors at a major Indigenous surfing event in Australia. The Surfist Indigenous Classic has been running for 26 years, but this is the first time siblings have taken the men's and women's titles. This story is from our friends at National Indigenous Television in Australia.
A welcoming ceremony marked the opening of the Surfist Classic at Newcastle's Merewether Beach. The carnival had its beginnings as a Couries versus Cops surfing event in the late 1990s, but has evolved into one of the most prestigious surfing events on the Australian calendar. Surfers travel from Victoria, Queensland and regional New South Wales to take part in the event. But it was a brother and sister combination from the Gold Coast who stole the show. Young Biripi man Taz Simon, who's 17th on the World Junior Rankings, took out the Open Men's event with an overall score of 13.85. His younger sister Bodhi was the winner in the Open Women's category with a score of 7.40. All 4 of the Simon siblings took part in the event, with the 2 other sisters competing against each other in one of the heats. The surfing action continues throughout the week at Merewether Beach, with the remainder of the Surfers Classic titles up for grabs. Ricky Kirby, NITV News.
Another episode of APTN National News has come to an end, but for news anytime, you can catch out our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Sav Jonesa, and from all of us here at APTN News, thank you so much for joining us today.